All right. So the question was, and now it's recording. The question was, I want to learn more about AI, or not AI, sorry, backtrack. I want to learn more about cloud stuff. Well, again, like I said, there's three big ones. There's AWS, which is absolutely the market leader. There is Azure, which is number two and catching up, especially with OpenAI and the AI integration. And then GCP, still very popular, and which is Google Cloud Provider, again, another popular one. One thing I would say is just because you pick one doesn't mean that that is normally what you're handcuffed in. A lot of them will use a hybrid cloud model. So a lot of companies, one org might use GCP because this tool is a little bit better for, X. And then another org within the same company might use Azure because they have a tool that's better for Y. And then you can actually create a hybrid model. That's above our pay grade for right now. But there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of prepare and get ready for that. I would say, I'm going to tell you this stuff, hold off right now, right? Wait till you get your group project done. Wait till you get prepared in other things, because though AWS will help you, it's not going to be the thing, right? We're going to talk about data structures and algorithms. That's going to be the gate. That is going to be, you can be the best developer out there, but if you can't pass a whiteboarding session, you won't get the job. So we'll do that. But AWS has something called a cloud practitioner exam. It's about $100. And this is something that you could do after you kind of get prepared and you're like, oh, I'm in a good space. I want to keep up. I want to learn more. Or, hey, I've got my first job and I want to expand my learning. This is a great thing. It's an exam. And so what it is foundational knowledge of AWS, cloud services, and cloud computing. Everybody has this. Azure's is called AZ900. I don't know what GCP's is called, but they have one as well. What companies will do is they will give you these certifications. And this is big in like Salesforce, all the big companies, because they want you to know their product and what you're familiar with and what you have knowledge of. If you're a developer at a company and you work your way up and you're really familiar with AWS and your company says, I want this new feature, I want this new tool, how can I do this? You're going to go with what's familiar. So that's why they try to get you to do these certs. Not to say that they're bad,
Clients next week.
but just know.
I was like, just because I told you I'm
Shane, I'm going to go ahead and pause you.
We talked.
Okay. Just because one doesn't mean that you don't know anything about the other, especially these big ones, these base ones, the AZ900, the Cloud Practitioner. They're just base cloud computing stuff. So they teach you about networks and load balancers and storage and how you can handle certain things. What's nice about it is it's $100 to get tested. Sorry, please mute whenever you guys come in if you can, unless you guys have something to say. I'm big on like, this is a collaborative learning environment. But the exam's like 90 minutes, but they do have like preparing for the exam. They have tons of guides. There's practice tests. There's tons of stuff out there. There's a game, which is really cool. So there's a game you can do called Cloud Quest, and as you play it, it teaches you about the cloud. So there's tons of resources. Again, Azure, i.e. Microsoft, and AWS and GCP have put in a lot of money to this because, again, the more you know about that, the better. So if you wanted to dive in, there's plenty of tools here that you could do. Or you could go on Udemy, and Udemy is a great resource for like cloud practitioner. There's a guy named Steven something. Can't remember his name. This guy right here, Stefan Merrick, and he will teach you this. It's a great course, cloud practitioner exam, and it's $24, right? So he'll walk you through each one if you wanted. And it's only $24. If you guys if you've never used Udemy, never pay the full price. Ever, 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 ever. It is always, I almost did this. It's always on sale. So there's always every day almost it's a 24-hour flash sale. So if that one day it didn't work, tomorrow it will. So never make sure that you're paying full price for Udemy courses. But this is a great one if you wanted to dive into kind of cloud stuff. Again, I want to say the thing that's going to prevent you from getting a job right now and even walking you through sort of the job process is, you will apply, right? And if you get a phone interview, then you will, or if you get in, right, an interview, then you typically have, this is not always, but this is typically how it'll work at a bigger company, is you'll get a phone interview with the HR, and you might have a couple interviews with maybe the hiring manager. And then you usually would have like your big day if it's like a panel interview. And so like at Twilio, I had like 5 people I had to panel with. And part of that is either on the day of the panel, you will have what we call a whiteboarding exam or test or technical challenge. And what either you do that with somebody or you have a scheduled time, or they might give you like a take home, right? And say, hey, can you do this over the weekend? I need it, or I need this within 48 hours. I want you to build out this feature. Both, I've seen both happen. Lots of friends have had both happen. The take home typically is just like they'll give you some code, or they'll say, hey, here's a bug. Can you fix this feature, figure out the bug? Or build us a, like I had somebody that was meeting at a network event the other day, and they just got hired as a React developer. I can't remember where they got hired, but they had to build a CRUD application over the weekend, which is what you guys did, right? And I was transparently, I was like, wow, that's like a pretty easy one to go into, but they had to build a CRUD application with a user and something else. Literally what your belt exam was. That was their technical challenge. And they got the job. They did it and got the job. So that's a take home. The other one, the whiteboarding, a little bit of history behind it, is what used to happen before the world sort of went global in the sense of remote working, video conferencing. Is if you got a job offer, or if you got kind of to that level, they would fly you out, or you would go, like if you lived in the same city, you would go have an interview on campus, and then you would see the campus, you'd meet people, you'd see all the amenities that they had. They're trying to sell you on the job. And then part of it is they would then, there would be a whiteboarding session where they would literally take you into an office or a conference room, and there would be a whiteboard, and they would say, hey, we want you to build, here's your prompt, here's your project, or here's your question, write out the code. And so that's why we call it whiteboarding. You don't actually use a whiteboard. Nowadays, what they'll do is they'll basically give you, there's a ton of different things, like HackerRank, where you can get a HackerRank exam. I've gotten some of these. So like when I interviewed with Starbucks and they gave me a HackerRank one where they literally, you just go in and then they give you 3 questions. But it's just algorithms, and you have to, they want to see how you think. Or they might, they might just give you here's a, an IDE, an online IDE, and you'll have somebody with you, and then you're just answering the questions, or they're going to prompt the question, or the question will already be on the screen, and then they will kind of walk you through, or, you start walking them through how to do that. We're going to talk in depth, because I'm really passionate about this. We're going to talk in depth about maybe strategies on how you can approach this, what to do, things to ask, because what you don't want to do, sorry, this is turning into way more of a tangent. What you don't want to do is just be like, okay, you want this, let me start coding. We'll have an entire office hour this week. I'll do that on Thursday. That's like, okay, here's a question. How do we approach this? What's some questions that we can ask? How can we approach this before we actually build this out, and do sort of like a mock one, if you will. But if you can't pass it, it does not matter how good your resume is. It doesn't matter how much experience you have or how good of a developer. If you can't pass this part, if let's say that you get, let's see, login. I think I have an account. No, I definitely do. Sorry, give me a second. Sorry. Good old off. 1 second, friends. Sorry about that. I have multi-factor on. Give me 1 second. Okay. So this is HackerRank. If you guys have never seen it, it's a great tool. There's a lot of other ones. And I can go through that here in a second. But what they'll do is they'll give you a question. And so it might say something like this, like, okay, here is the challenge. So it's going to give you the question here. And then you will have, some time to ask questions, get more information, and then you will have to go and actually write your code here, right? And actually figure that out, or sorry, right here, and then go figure it out and you write your code. There's lots of ways that we can approach it, but if you can't, if this is the struggle for you right now, that's very okay. That's why we have this entire course. But this is going to be the thing that is the door to get you into the job. Because again, what'll typically happen, all of my interviews have been, you have two, if you can do two, they'll give you 3 questions, they give you 1 hour for 3 questions. And if you can at least do 2 out of 3, then you'll move on to the next round, or then it gets down to like, okay, you did 3 out of 3 versus the other person did 2 out of 3, therefore you might get the job, sort of thing. So any questions on that? I know that was kind of a lot so far. Go ahead, Jason.
Is HackerRank something you could almost just use as like drilling, like practice for algorithms?
Yeah. Yep. A lot of people do.
Okay, cool.
I would say, I would definitely get familiar with HackerRank, especially because, like I said, some of the bigger companies will either, there's 2 ways it can go. Either it's the end of your interview process and you're in this and they will use this, or it's a nice filter for companies. So if you apply, right, maybe you meet the metrics because, your resume is good and et cetera, et cetera. Instead of them wasting time and or money on interviewing everybody, they might send this out and say, hey, the next step, great, we had our phone interview because they hire recruiters to bring you on, or recruiters find you, have your phone interview. Yeah, you'd be a great fit. Let's pass this, and then we know that you have the knowledge, and then it might, you might have 2 technicals. But I definitely tell students, get used to HackerRank, only because if a company uses it, you understand what it looks like. There's like 2 big ones. HackerRank and LeetCode are the two big ones. There's lots of really great material coming out, which I will show you guys here in a second, but HackerRank is the one that companies will use. The other one, like I was just mentioning, is called LeetCode. And this is just, it's a grind, guys. This is a grind to do. I don't know. Sure. But LeetCode is another one. Same exact thing. But you just, you get one, and then it's going to ask you the question, given a collection of candidates and a target number, find all unique combinations, candidates for the candidate's number, sum to target. Cool. So then it's saying that if you input an array of this and the target is 8, then the output should be, okay, if I add up 1 + 1 + 6, 1, 1, and 6, that's going to give me 8, 1, 2, and 5, 1 and 7, 2 and 6, right? And so what it's doing, what this is explaining is this is what your output should be. So you should get something back that looks like this, which is really helpful because it's saying, you should get a list or array back, right? So when we know when we're returning, we go, okay, well, we need to return a list. And then the way they want each number is, okay, it needs to be in a list as well. So it's a list of lists or an array of arrays. Array and list are the same word. Python and JavaScript just call them same, different things, same thing. And so again, just getting familiar with how these operate or what this looks like, because there might be some constraints. So we know that candidate's length is going to be greater than 1, and it's going to be less than or equal to 100. So the max amount of candidates we'll have is 100, right? And so it's like, okay, great. Cool. And so then, yeah, target's going to be less than or equal to 30. And so just kind of understanding how these work will be really, really helpful in kind of in the long run. Because whenever you get that, every company tries to simulate these. So I like HackerRank a little bit more. you might ask yourself, how do I know if I got the right answer? Well, once you submit code, there will be this run code and it's got a bunch of test cases. Test cases is basically we're creating functions that take in an array. It should be a list because this isn't Python 3, but here we are. That take that in. And so it's going to test a bunch and say, hey, does this work? Does this meet all the constraints? Things like, what if they're all negative numbers? How does that work? What if there's positive and negative numbers? What if it's null? What if it's 0, right? These are what we call edge cases. And so test cases, edge cases are like the weird nuancy things that you figure out. Test cases are just, hey, does it pass all the tests? And then it'll say, yep, you passed every test. And then you submit it. And then it's like, okay, cool. It saved it as submitted code. Now there's another one that I would encourage. And again, this is just extra information I'm giving you guys. We have not even started the class yet. So if you're overwhelmed, don't be. We're going to get there, I promise. But there's one called NeetCode, which I love, neetcode.io. And basically it's built on top of LeetCode, which is kind of funny. It's somebody who worked at Amazon, ended up, he's, I don't know, kind of big on YouTube, I guess. But worked at Amazon, and what's kind of cool, these are all in Python is the only downfall. But you can go here, here's the question. And then what's nice about it is you can run it, you can test it. What you can then do is see the solution. And you can watch a video. He does a video of how he came to every solution. And so here's the code that he used to solve this problem. Does anybody know what this is? Like, this is Python, but does anybody know what this means?
The arrow function?
It's not an arrow function. Great question, though. Or great thought.
Yeah, my first inclination was an arrow function, but I don't think Python has those.
I think that's return, like the list return to Boolean. I think that's a new Python, new version have that.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. So if you guys have taken Java, you know that when we declare a variable, we have to put the type, right? So we have to say it's a string, it's a float, it's whatever. Python doesn't have that. It's what we call an interpreted language, meaning, once it gets there, it just interprets what that is. If it's a number, if it's a string, if it's a Boolean, if it's, whatever. What this is, and I think this came out in Python 3.7, 8, or 9, one of those three. Sorry, it's not super, it's newer. I think we're on like 3.12 now, but it's newer. But this is just a way that we can write better code. It's not necessary in the sense of, for what we're doing or your project, you don't have to do this, but it is something that I would encourage you guys to kind of think through, because what it does is it helps us write better code. And what this is basically saying is nums is going to be a value passed in, and we should expect that nums is a list of integers, right? So just a bunch of numbers, a list of numbers. And so when I'm decoding, let's say that Austin here wrote this code and I'm decoding it, and because there's an error or something, or we're getting some weird bug, I could say, okay, well, this is supposed to be a list of numbers, but I'm seeing that a letter came through. Oh, now I can problem solve a lot quicker. What this is saying this is what it returns. So this returns the type Boolean, very similar to if you took Java, when you said, like this is what your function is going to, static void or whatever it was. Very, very similar, that this should return a Boolean. Again, just to help us understand be more thoughtful for our code. And if anybody is working with our code, they can say, oh, this is supposed to return a Boolean, but it's returning the number 3, right? And so there might be an issue with our return statement. Somebody said it's like TypeScript, sort of. But TypeScript compiles and then runs. This does not. It doesn't. I believe. I'll have to check, but I'm like 90% positive that it doesn't actually break your code if it's wrong. Like if this actually returns the number 3, I don't think that breaks it. This is just more of a decorator. I think it's called Python decorators.
So that actually doesn't get ran, it's just there to be like a note. Right?
Oh, that's not a decorator. Yeah, it's more like a note. Not a decorator. Decorators are on top of our functions. I'll figure out what it's called. I can't remember quite what it's called, but yeah, it's just a way for us to write a note and say, this is what we're expecting it to return. Yeah, to be more descriptive, because Python's so just loosey goosey. It doesn't necessarily help like runtime, but us having better code in the long run will help us, because like, again, if you took Java, you understood that if you had an error, if you had an error in your code, it wouldn't run, right? When it tried to compile, it would get an error. Python and JavaScript, we don't have that. So basically it's just in the moment, we could have bad code, but it runs until we get to that moment and then it breaks everything. That's why TypeScript came in for JavaScript to kind of prevent that from happening. And then Python's trying to at least move to where we can, start writing or start, doing some more. Let me get the name real fast. No. I don't know. Let's see. Old Chat GPT type annotation. Yeah, so that's what it's called. Type annotation indicates that the nums parameter is expected to be a list of integers. Type hints are used specifically, blah, 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 to return values to improve code clarity and help with static type checking. So, and see, it says it suggests the nums parameter should be a list. It doesn't prevent it from running. Let me make sure. Will it prevent it from running? Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so type hints improves code readability. And then if you go to static analysis, I guess like MyPy and linears, but that's not something that we're going to deal with. Cool. Great. Okay. One thing I want to talk about is ChatGPT and AI. I will typically use, I have a tool on Copilot or on VS Code called Copilot. And Copilot will kind of autocomplete some stuff. If I'm writing a lot of code, if it's something pretty basic, I might keep that on. If it's something that we are learning for the first time, I'll try to take that off. Depends on time. The reason I do it is because I've been in your shoes, or if, you know, whenever you're in class, maybe somebody makes an error. I don't type super fast and super well, which is wild because this is my career. So I make a lot of errors, right? And so it's just nothing is more agonizing for me as a student. Nothing was more agonizing than seeing your instructors error and then like talking and then they keep writing code and they go, all right, let's run this. And then it doesn't work. And they're like, well, why is this not working? Right. And then you're like, it's because of this. I could have told you that 3 minutes ago, saved us all time. And so what I typically do is I will use Copilot. Copilot is a tool by GitHub, and it uses OpenAI basically, which is ChatGPT, the same company. And so what it will do is autocomplete some of my code. If that ever is a hindrance, please tell me and I'll turn it off. I do it more so because it doesn't make the errors of the typing perspective. It still makes errors all the time. But it doesn't make the errors, and then I can sit and explain the code versus me typing it out and making an error, and it just kind of slows everything down. I get through more material because this is a pretty big 4 weeks. And so I do use that. Should you use that? At this point, I would say absolutely not. Here's why. Right now, you guys are still preparing and learning, especially the data structures and algorithms portion. You guys have already learned your languages, that's fine. If you wanted to do it while you are doing your project, okay, I can't stop you, you guys are adults. But when you're learning data structures and algorithms, I would really, really, really encourage you to not. Here's why: is if it is autocomplete, great, you might just get used to that, and you might be like, oh, I know how to do this. But if I were to tell you or give you a whiteboard and say, hey, write out a class for a single node for a singly linked list, right? You might be like, wait a second, hold up, what? Right? You might be able to type it with Copilot, but if you actually have to write it out yourself, you're not going to be able to do it. In your job interview, you won't be able to use Copilot, right? And so I would definitely say don't use it for any of your algorithms or anything like that for right now. What it is good for, and this is where I would use it if I were you, is we are going to have plenty of stuff to go through. And there's going to be some more stuff that we're going to go through even more, right? So tomorrow we're going to talk about algorithms. We're going to jump through that. You're going to have like nested loops, all that good stuff. And you have arrays to do, right? Here is your array. Can you do this? Come here, write this, and do this. Yep, you can. And this will give you the answer. But again, I say this in the kindest way. I've got a job and I know how to do this. You guys are here to learn how to do this stuff. And you are only, the reason I say I got a job is because it doesn't offend me if you don't want to learn it. I want you to learn it, but this, if you do it this way and copy and paste, you're going to not learn it. And so when you get to the actual job part and you actually have your interview, you're not going to be able to pass and you're not going to get a job because you have to learn how to do this stuff. So it's my big, big encouragement is please don't do that just for your graduation sake, not even graduation sake, for your employment sake, because we want to make sure, and I want to make sure that you actually know this material. What it is good for is if you don't understand something, if maybe I write a line of code and you're like, hey, I'm not understanding singly linked lists. You could say, can you explain singly? I do this all the time. I literally use this prompt like I'm a freshman in college. And then it'll tell you like, all right, here's a singly linked list. Here's the components. Here's a visualization of how to do that, right? It's really good for that sort of knowledge. To where you can really get an in-depth explanation of, okay, well, what is this? How does it work? How do we do this? Why are we using this, right? So getting this knowledge, supplementing the platform and your outside resources with something like this is really great. The second thing I would say is we're going to eventually get into something called Big O notation, and I will probably teach it sooner rather than later. I think our class has it like you learn Big O, but I don't think I teach Big O until like.
I thought it was on Thursday of week 1. I could be wrong. Just the title.
OOP, object-oriented programming. Last time I looked, it was like week.
Never mind, I just gaslighted myself.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Anyways, I will be teaching it sooner. I'll be teaching it this week because as we get into algorithms, one of the other things we need to do is we need to understand time and space complexity. What does that mean? Well, anytime we create an algorithm, whether it's a for loop or we're trying to do this right here, right? And do this algorithm has what we call a runtime, right? How long does it take to run? Is it efficient? Is it good or is it bad, right? Is it easy for the computer to do this or is it kind of tough? The way that we quantify that is something called Big O notation, which is time and space complexity. How complex is it for the computer to run this from a time perspective? Is it slow? Is it fast? And how much space does it take up? That is going to be the second part of your questions when you're getting a interview here, where you're gonna have to, they're gonna ask you, let's say this question, you're gonna get the code, and then the last thing they're gonna say is, okay, what is the time and space complexity of this algorithm? So we need to understand, how do we look at that? How do we understand time and space complexity? How do we, how do we quantify this speedy? And then they might say, if you have maybe a slower one, I say, is there any way we can improve that? That is where I would say ChatGPT comes in, like, please do it this way. Like, please use this and do it. Once we learn time and space complexity, do it as a practice where, let's say you get this, and you go and you write this code, right? You go and you write it and you go, okay, from what I know, I think the time and space complexity is blank. It's O of n and O of n time and O of 1 space. Great. Then go take your algorithm and say, what is, like, if I were to take this algorithm, I could say, what is the time and space complexity of this algorithm? And see if you're right, because it's going to say, okay, this is O of 1 and blah, 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 right? So it'll give me, here's my time complexity, returning O of 1. And, or this is O of n. And then this might be O of 1, right? And so it's, okay, great. I was right? I thought it was O of n and O of 1, and I was correct. So first off, check to say, am I correct? Do I know this? The second thing is, now after you've written your algorithm and you go, okay, can I improve it? You don't know how. Maybe it's, O of n squared, which isn't a great one. You might say, is there any way I can improve this algorithm and let ChatGPT come and improve it? And what I typically do, because guys, this is literally what I do, is I'll say, is there any way I can improve this algorithm? And tell me everything you're doing to improve it, how it's improving it, and why you would do it this way. And then it will literally give you all of the information of, here's how I would improve this. Here's why. And so it's just learning, right? Like constantly taking and saying, okay, I did it myself. I learned it. Now, how do I make it better? So instead of coming to me specifically, which I'm happy to help, but this is a great tool on demand to say, does this work? Right? Or you would run it and you would know if it works. You would say, what is the time space complexity? Can I make this any better? Could I be more efficient? And you'll start to pick up on patterns like, oh, I use hash maps a lot, or I'm going to start doing X, Y, or Z. That is how I would use AI. Does that make sense? Am I talking way too much? I know that that's literally my job, but am I overwhelming you guys at all? How you feeling? Put a 1 in the chat if you're feeling great. Put a 0 if you're overwhelmed. 10. Oh, I love it, Colin. Cool. Like I said, this is day 1. Everything we talked about today, we have 4 weeks to learn time and space complexity. We have 4 weeks to learn algorithms, approaching algorithms, how we do that. So if at all you're feeling overwhelmed, you're like, oh my gosh, don't be. It's going to be okay. That's why I'm here. That's why you paid for Coding Dojo. And that's why, I'm an instructor here. And that's why we have an entire stack dedicated to this, because it's a big, big part of the job. My last piece of advice, then we'll take a little break so that I can get some water and use the restroom, is if you haven't already, go on to meetup.com, and sure. This is a tool that you can use to find things around where you're at to start networking with people. Not only do you have to know algorithms to get a job, you will. I am telling you, I've got experience in the field. I know a lot of people in the field. It is all about who you know, especially in today's market. It is a lot about who you know also. So if you don't know anybody, that's okay. but it's a lot about who you know as well. And so going to meetups to get in the community of programmers, to learn programming, to make friends will pay dividends in the long run. So that way you can, eventually, I've known you for the last 6 months. My company's hiring, you do Java, right? Oh, let me give you a referral, and then you can get an into a company that way. I've had students do this and get jobs even before they graduated because they just networked or I had a student 2 stacks ago who just went to a networking event, told him this, went to a networking event, happened to be a company there, one of the major grocery stores in Texas called HEB, was at this programming event randomly and was like, hey, I'm looking for young developers to be part of this program. He was like, yeah, that's me. Talk to them, got in, and then was offered a job before he even started projects and algorithms. They were like, cool, we want to grow you up and build you up. And it was all just because he started networking. So there's lots of stuff that you could do. So you could do like Python networking or Java, or, you could do, there's like, for us, there's like Code and Coffee or Rust. Don't do Rust right now. But you could, there's lots of stuff, online stuff, that you could jump into and see these, lots of stuff here. So definitely start meeting up with people. Go ahead, Jason.
Just kind of on the subject of getting a job and all that, throughout my whole journey with Coding Dojo, I feel like I've pretty much neglected the career services aspect of things. So I didn't know if you had any just insight, thoughts on, where we should be with that, how we should be interacting with it. Because so far I just feel like there's been so much course material that I almost haven't even humored it.
Yeah, great question. I would say, you're here. If you haven't interacted, a lot of people, you're trying to survive, right? And so don't beat up yourself about doing that. I would say my encouragement to you all is start applying now. Don't start applying when you graduate. Start applying now, because even the hiring process, like my hiring process at Twilio was like 5 weeks. It took forever. Companies move slow. And that was after I got into their hiring, like a circuit. So I started applying now. So if I were you guys, I would really challenge you to set like a hard deadline for yourselves to have a resume done by the end of the week, and working with career services on that. End of the week, early next week, so that way you can start applying to stuff. So I would utilize them. Dontrail knows this. I will be doing I'll probably do it early because a lot of students have found it helpful. I'll be doing an entire office hour of things I wish I would have known entering the job market, talking about salary negotiations, talking about tools to use. A lot of stuff we talked about today, like NeetCode, HackerRank, ways to approach salary negotiations, things like equity versus stock options and how that can kind of work. Things I didn't know when I entered, right? I came from the nonprofit world. And so when they're like, hey, we're going to give you equity in our company, I was like, I have no idea what that means. And so I'll walk through that. That doesn't mean that I'm career services. That's not what I do. They're very talented at what they do. So I would just say that it's okay, but I would start putting the gas on the pedal a little bit to make sure that you guys are starting to apply by, Wednesday of next week. Resume's ready. It's gone through with them. They've given you some stuff, and then you can go from there. That said, are you failing if you just are busy and you're handling life and you're just trying to survive? Absolutely not. Please understand and give yourselves lots of grace. This is really hard to learn. You're trying to do something that a lot of people can't do in regards of challenge yourself. Like even, I can't even remember who it was, Nick, like I was saying earlier, the fact that you stuck through it, even though you had to do some retakes, that is such a testament of things that a lot of people would have quit. Right. And so all of you guys, I'm a big mental health person. So, Yeah, like
I'm not
big
gonna
mental
lie,
health.
I almost did.
Yeah, but like you didn't, right? And so that should be a win for you. So I'm big mental health. If you feel like, especially if you've got kiddos, you've got a partner or a family or something, right? And you're like, God, dude, I don't even know you, and you're giving me timelines on other things, and I have projects, and I have all this stuff, and I want to drown. Like, give yourselves a little bit of grace there. If it happens Thursday, if it happens at the end of the stack, just give yourself some grace. You're doing really hard things. So really proud. The fact that all of you guys are here, incredible job. Again, a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't make it this far. So you should be really kind to yourself. If you have the capacity to have a little bit of urgency, have a little bit of urgency. If you're like, dude, I just need to survive, then survive. That's a win. Both of those are a win. So sorry if that feels like kind of cop out answer, but I just also know what it's like to be like, oh, I'm so pressured. And I can't even, like, my wife just graduated law school and took the bar. And so there's a lot of things she's like, I was trying just to make it the next 24 hours. And then, you know, I don't have time for hobbies. I don't have time for any of that. So I have a lot of empathy for doing this stuff. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, of course, Taryn.
It's something that I feel like I kind of needed to hear
Mhm.
because 3-stacker here, boy, it's been crazy.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and whether it's 1, 2, or 3 stacks, like my I'm gonna go ahead and pause. I'm gonna stop the recording here. Give me 1 second.